wasn't that many years ago that the official number given for the Chinese holdings of U.S. Treasuries was over $1 trillion. So that since we're now in the 700, 800 range, it's clear that not only in the last 3 months, but for some years now, the trend is clearly down. Sometimes it levels off for a while for whatever complicated reasons, but clearly the Chinese authorities in the Chinese bank want to reduce their exposure to U.S. dollars. And one can speculate all one wants around it. There are usually multiple reasons, but among them, no question at all, is the fact that the United States' indebtedness, and let's remember, the United States is the largest debtor country in the world, has been a problem for quite some time. And the recent budget, the so-called big, beautiful bill that Mr. Trump and his Republican Congress passed, makes all that worse. It continues trillion-dollar deficits basically into the indefinite future. And we're already at a very high debt level in terms of the history of the United States, in terms of the ratio between the national debt and the GDP. However you look at this, and there are multiple ways, many people in China, but also many people around the world, including here in the United States, believe with the Bank of China that this level of indebtedness, not even speaking this level of growth of the deficits and the debts that result from the deficits, is quote unquote unsustainable. Now, that's a funny word because it doesn't tell you all that much. It's a prediction about the future, and we know what those are worth when any of us does that. So, yeah, you probably can sustain this, but no one knows for how long you can, because that immediately forces you to ask, look how long they have, in fact, sustained it. The United States has been a deficit country now for quite a while, and its debts around the world have grown quite a while. Countries around the world accumulate dollars. They're willing to do it. The United States, in case people don't understand it, gets enormous benefits by having the dollar be the global currency. I mean, just to give you one example, it is difficult in all countries to fight wars, but it is always more difficult if you tax your people to pay for the war. If you want to see support for a war disappear in terms of popularity, just try paying for it with taxes. So what you do instead is borrow so that you don't have to tax your people. The borrowing is a much more pleasurable way for politicians to cover the costs. And if the whole world is willing to lend you money, which has been the case, then the United States can be the world's police person or military, the way we talk about, in part because of the reserve position of the dollar, of the fact that the world has been willing to lend. But as with all things like this, eventually, if you keep doing it, you will destroy it. You will overdo it. And that's the issue that really is coming to the fore now. The world's owners of American debt, and just to remind, the single largest creditor of the United States is Japan. The second is China. The third is Britain. Okay, all of them and the many others that hold American debt are very worried by the level of debt being added to all the time, because that's the way the Republicans and the Democrats resolve their contradiction. It's a very bizarre dysfunction of American capitalism that our political leaders, Democrats supporting public spending, roughly speaking, Republicans supporting no taxes for corporations and the rich. How do you resolve, if you're not going to tax the corporations and the rich, to pay for the spending that you better do, or else you'll lose the people's support? The solution? You go to the corporations and the rich and you say, on condition of not taxing you, which we won't, you have to lend us the money we would have taxed from you if we had the courage to tax you. In America, America, there is no courage politically, so they don't tax corporations and the rich. They keep cutting the taxes, as they did a few weeks ago, again under Mr. Trump, having done it in his first presidency back in 2017. And so they borrow instead from the corporations and the rich. We call that public finance, but it is a corrupt hustle if you're honest. Well, that then has this side effect of making us a debtor country. We're borrowing forever. And now the terrible fear, which is always there in every creditor for thousands of years. I want to lend. I'm making a lot of money by lending, but I've got to be careful not to lend to whoever borrows from me if there's a chance they won't pay it back. Well, the United States, being the dominant country, has been able to shoo that away. Oh, of course, we will never default. But smart politicians, which exist in China and everywhere else, understand that at a certain point, it won't be up to the politicians. There will be a groundswell from below, and then it will force the hand. And the politicians, having no courage, can't face their own people, will start cutting back, paying off their creditors. And you don't want to be holding the U.S. Treasury when that moment happens, whether you're the Chinese bank or the Japanese authorities or anyone else. That's where we are. It is so serious that there is now public conversation and the action. The Chinese are not alone. Others have also been paring their holdings of the dollar. You can still borrow. I don't want to overstate this, but we haven't had this kind of discussion before, and it tells you that we are coming toward the end of this game that has been played at least since the United States went off the gold standard in 1971. The benefit of the United States in having China subsidize American domestic and foreign policy by picking up, hundreds of billions of dollars of American debt is offset by the fact, which, by the way, is carefully not spoken about in the United States, that if you are China and you own whatever it is, let's say $700 or $800 billion of American debt, that the American government is required to pay interest on that debt. And if the interest is 5%, let's say, and if it is $800 billion that China owns, then $40 billion a year is collected in taxes by the United States government. It is not used for American military. It's not used to maintain the roads or to help the students or whatever else the government does. The government functions merely as a collection agency and ships those $40 billion of taxpayer money to Beijing, which the Chinese are free to use in any way they see fit, which I'm sure they do. But the United States does that, tries to keep it from its own people, because every time I explain this to an American audience, I can assure you the looks I get are the looks of people who have just discovered that the sky is blue or something. It's extraordinary. But it's the weighing of the American government, which understands this, that the benefit of China buying the debt is greater than the loss, if you like, of the $40 billion that goes to subsidize China rather than the United States. And they are equally concerned now because they don't want the Chinese to unload in a short period of time significant parts of that debt, because that would crash the price of those bonds. And as we all know, that would raise interest rates. And China's a big enough player that this would be all kinds of problem around the world, would be as destabilizing of the world economy as almost anything else you could think of. So that has to be managed as well. So for me, I see them, the Americans in their way, but the Chinese authorities also in their way, as caught in a web of complicated relationships. And I think Mr. Trump, in his frustration, and of course I speak for the forces behind, not him as an individual, he doesn't matter, but the forces behind him, in their frustration at being caught at a time when the American empire and system is clearly declining and the Chinese system is rising, the whole world can see that, Americans too, it's very painful to live in that frustration, and then they act impulsively. That's what these tariffs are about and the sanctions are about, and they are in the process of discovering when you suddenly destabilize all these webs, it is impossible to know how that works out, and it can just as likely work out at your expense, that would be the American expense, as that of anybody else. And that horrible fear is what can't be spoken in the United States. As I look at the American economy, the way that it is experiencing the decline of the empire, the growing difficulties of a world economy in which the United States' position deteriorates, is actually expressed internally by a very profound and, I believe, politically destabilizing inequality. In other words, the top 10 or 20% of the American population is now doing what I expect declining empires have probably always seen. That is, the people at the top are in positions of political power and economic dominance, that they can use those positions to hold on to their wealth better than anybody else, which means that the costs of the declining empire, the rising costs of imports, the reduction in job opportunities, the way it plays out, the people at the bottom are required to absorb more than their share of a declining empire, because the people at the top hold on to all of their wealth, or pretty nearly all of it, in one way or another. So you have, for example, the absurd dichotomy in which the stock market in the United States remains elevated. The price is going crazy in Walmart or Target or the grocery store or the supermarket. These are signs of a gap widening, and that is political dynamite in the United States, because the one thing that distinguished American capitalism above all from its predecessors, British and European and even Japanese, was the fact that you had in the United States a remarkably large, quote unquote, middle class. It was, of course, workers, but they were better paid than workers in other places had mostly been. Their wages, real wages, rose for most of the 20th century pretty steadily, even across the Great Depression. And it sustained these weird notions of American exceptionalism and the notion of a great middle class. The last 30, 40 years have destroyed this image. We're not exceptional and we're not middle class. Most of the middle class is enraged as it experiences its destruction down back into the working class, which they thought they had forever escaped. That contradiction, that anger, that explains Mr. Trump. He rides that anger into office. And the Democrats lose the working class, which they had inherited because of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. They've now lost it because not only could they not bring the working class up from what they had gotten in the New Deal, they couldn't even preserve what the New Deal had gotten for them. They were the weak sister of the Republicans, exposed as that, and so the population goes the other way. For a while, that'll change again. But right now, I think what most endangers the United States as a culture, as a society, is the fact that the division between rich and poor is, in my judgment, even more unsustainable than the debt.